Congress has signed a new bill, everybody. Americans are eligible to claim an extra $125, and extra bonus relief checks. This comes as state officials pass new relief legislation. Indiana has another budget surplus, and Governor Eric Holcomb wanted to disperse to people in the state. Early this month, the governor announced he wanted to distribute $1 billion in tax relief to help people in the state dealing with inflation. Now this week, he has announced plans to call lawmakers back into a special session on July 6th. Under his plan, each taxpayer will receive about $225, and that's in addition to the $125 of automatic tax refund that the governor pledged to each Indiana taxpayer. Another 2 million people in the state have already received a $125 tax refund by direct deposit. Refunds for more than 2 million other Indiana taxpayers are still being processed, and state officials expect them to be mailed later this summer. Now, people in the state, such as the governor's office, said earlier this year that 4.3 million Indiana residents will get an automatic $125 refund. That means to date, just under half of the tax refunds have been processed so far. And now, everybody, Congress also passed a bill extending some food assistance measures for anti-hunger advocates. They have called for critical care as more parents struggle with the rising cost of inflation. Less than a week before the measures were set to end, crisis-era child nutrition waivers helped millions of people get access to the meals in both school and during the summer weeks. Now, the bipartisan legislation now heads to the president's desk for his signature. It would extend some of the dozens of child nutrition waivers that Congress gave the Agricultural Department. Would not extend the most groundbreaking rules of the federal waivers, one that made school breakfast and lunches free to all students regardless of their families. Now, after passing House Representatives bill, the bill went to the Senate before the Senate. Now, after passing the House Representatives through a majority vote, the bill went before the Senate, where Rand Paul pushed for the return of the reduced price meat category. The bill passed unanimously in the Senate, with that change as the clock ticked toward getting the bill passed in time, forcing the bill back to the House of Representatives for a second vote with the revision in place. Having to pay for reduced price meals is significant for many families. Before March 2020, children and families whose incomes were at or below 130% of the federal poverty level were eligible for free school meals, while those in families whose incomes were 135% of the poverty level were eligible for reduced price meals.
To inquire.
Secretary Yellen, thank you so much for being here, and I'd like to follow up on a letter that Senator Elizabeth Warren and I sent to you and Commissioner Reddick in April. This letter requested information on steps that Treasury and IRS are taking to ensure that low-income taxpayers are not unfairly audited at far greater rates, and we are still awaiting a response. I'm encouraged that Treasury's budget request highlights the need for new resources and especially new skilled staff, including revenue agents, to focus on tax fairness and audits of large businesses, partnerships, and high-wealth individuals. How would these resources change the audit strategy of the IRS to lift the unfair burden on low-income taxpayers, especially EITC filers who are audited at 4.5 times greater a rate than other taxpayers with less than $500,000?
So first, let me thank you for your very thoughtful letter. And I think what's happened here is that over the course of the last decade, the resources available to the IRS have been simply gutted, and it's meant it doesn't have the capacity to enforce our tax laws as they apply to high-end evaders. So what's happened is that the audit rates at the top of the wealth and income distribution have fallen off far more quickly than the audit rates of those at the bottom. And that is simply utterly unfair. And it doesn't address the tax gap estimated at $7 trillion over the next decade. That tax gap reflects underpayment by high-income taxpayers. So we very much hope that Congress will provide the long-term assured funding that the IRS needs to hire those professionals who have the skills and are able to audit the tax returns of high-income taxpayers and
Thank you.
collect that revenue.
Yes, thank you for that. And I want to highlight an important item you have in your budget to fight inflation. It affects my area of Southern California, which is one of the most expensive housing and rental markets in the country. That's why I was so glad to see that in addition to increased funding for the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, which assists in providing underserved communities with access to capital and played a critical role in providing them PPP loans, Treasury is also proposing to create a new dedicated CDFI Affordable Housing Supply Fund. Could you talk about what impact this funding could have in combating inflation in the rental and housing market and why CDFIs are the right vehicle to deliver these funds?
By an estimated 11% without increasing opiate use. If I may, Chairwoman, I'd like to submit for the record a study to show some of the impact of that program, that distribution program.
Without objection.
Thank you. To maximize the life-saving potential of these treatments, it is imperative, as you know, Doctor, that the overdose reversal medication are affordable and easily accessible in every city and town across the United States. Director, how does the current administration's national drug control strategy increase access to Narcan so it can be readily available for people who need it the most, including those historically neglected communities like mine? I mean, you should know this, seeing some of the information coming out. I think the past decade, over 2,000 of my fellow Detroiters lost their lives to this corporate, many corporate funding pushed, addiction on them. Of them, 364 were overdose deaths in 2019. 86% of those deaths were involved opiate. And so what can you tell me that you all are doing to increase access?
Thank you, Congressman. Naloxone or Narcan, this is about making sure it's affordable and it's accessible. And one of the things we're doing is making sure that states have a set aside amounts to be able to both acquire as well as have a distribution plan to especially the most vulnerable communities within the states to be able to distribute. It does no good sitting on a shelf because it expires. It's not saving lives. But we are very intentional about making sure that we are removing the affordability aspect of naloxone. We are providing naloxone in the hands of people who need it because we know that if we do not, we are on track to have 163,000 deaths a year by 2025. But if we do what the strategy calls for, we can reduce that number literally by half to 81,000. If we accumulate over the next 3 years, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of American lives that could be saved. And naloxone is life-saving. For every dollar, there's a $2,760 return on investment. It is the biggest bang for the buck in terms of saving lives, and it is a